Hi friends, this is Joe and this is episode number 162 of the Decahedron RPG podcast, and this is our first ever call-in RPG review episode. And today's game that we are reviewing is Fudge. But before we get to that, let me just quickly announce that the game that we are reviewing for next month will be Tunnels and Trolls. But we'll talk more about that at the end of the episode. Right now, let's get into the Fudge review. So before we start talking about Fudge, before we start listening to everyone's calls, before I give my review, let me state up front that I am not an impartial reviewer here. Fudge is my game, or was my game. Anyway, back in the beginning, AD&D was my game. AD&D was my game for fantasy. Traveler was my game for science fiction. Top Secret was my game for espionage. Gamma World was my game for, mutant future type stuff. All of these were my game, right? If I were going to go with game, depending on what kind of game, I would pick that game, that product as a default. And then I discovered GURPS. And that changed everything for me, and GURPS became my game. I loved it because I didn't need all these different games for the genre. If I wanted to play space opera, GURPS. If I wanted to play dungeon fantasy, GURPS. If I wanted to play espionage, GURPS. No matter what I wanted, GURPS could handle it. And then, after, 10 years or so, maybe, not quite, I discovered Fudge. And that became my new game. It was everything I liked about GURPS, but better. To the point of I got really involved in the Fudge communities and stuff. At the time there was a Fudge mailing list run by Carl Cravens, I want to say his name was. Stephen O'Sullivan, the author, was on there, and Anne Dupuis, the owner of Grey Ghost Games, who's the publisher. She was on there, and it was just a great community, a whole bunch of fans just talking about Fudge and loving Fudge, and I was an active member there to the point that when they got the chance to do sort of an add-on for Grimm's Tooth Traps 2, I volunteered and I was selected. So if you have a newer copy of Grimm's Tooth Traps 2 and you look at the back, there's a section called Grimm's Tooth Traps 2 and Fudge, and I have a co-author byline there. So there's that. And then if you look at Stephen O'Sullivan, like I said, he was the game designer, the author. If you look at his webpage, he has some designer notes for Fudge, and he mentions me on there. It's not, oh, thanks, Joe, you saved the game. It's nothing like that. It's a small little mention, but nonetheless, I am mentioned there. So I have a built-in bias to love this game. So whether that made me review it more generously, or maybe it made me overcompensate and review it more harshly, I don't know. I'm just throwing the information out there so you can use that when you listen to me. All right. Let's talk about what Fudge is. So Fudge is a generic universal roleplay. Wait, that's GURPS. But all those things still apply. It is generic. You can use it for any genre. It's universal. Actually, those are almost the same word anyway. It is a role-playing system. We're going to get into that in more detail as we go along. It was developed by committee, so to speak, but not committee of people at some hoity-toity game company, trying to make money. It was done on Usenet. Now, for you kids in the room who don't know what Usenet was the Reddit of the 1990s. And just like Reddit now has subgroups, r/whatever, Usenet was broken down to groups and subgroups, and Fudge came about on rec.games.frp.other or something like that. And Stephen O'Sullivan started in 1992, And, he got a whole bunch of input. And let's talk about Stephen Sullivan for a second. So like I said, he's the author, he's the lead game designer. So even though it was designed in committee, Stephen didn't want it to be this hodgepodge. So it was everybody's input, but filtered through one mind. In that way, it would be a cohesive product that stood on its own, and it wasn't, all these different things. At least that was the plan. So yeah, he got all this input, and in the beginning, they were calling it Slug, which stood for, what was it? The Simple Laid Back Universal Game. But that was just their kind of code name for it. And as time went by, they started calling it Fudge, which, it was the 90s. Acronyms, GURPS, right? GURPS. Acronyms were the thing in games. TWRPs, that was another one. And so Fudge was the freeform, universal, donated gaming engine. Because Stephen wasn't just some guy. And believe me, I don't have anything against just some guy. I'm just some guy. But Stephen was a professional game writer, game designer. If you look at the original GURPS Bestiary, he wrote that. If you look at GURPS Bunnies and Burrows, he wrote that. This was his profession. This was his job. He was a writer of game books. And he donated his time to make this game free for everybody. So that's why it was the donated gaming engine. So that was around 1992 or so. That's when it started. In 1995, it's what most people consider to be the first official draft, completed product. And it was put out there for free. But one of the things that Stephen did is he got in touch with a lawyer. And long before the OGL, like I said, this is 94, 95, the OGL wouldn't come out until about 99, 2000. He got with a lawyer and he made a license by which anybody could take this product and make their own product based on it and run with it. And one of the stipulations that he had made with the community was that the game, in one form at least, would always be free online. And in the beginning, the game was just a bunch of text files. So no matter your computer, no matter what, you could open it and you could bring it to your word processor and format it the way you wanted. It was great. All right. So 1995, like I said, that's like the first official version. And at this point, they change the acronym. So instead of the Freeform Universal Donated Gaming Engine, it became the Freeform Universal Do-It-Yourself Gaming Engine. And then in 2005, I think, Stephen sold the rights outright to Grey Ghost Games. Around that time, actually even a little before that time, he felt that Fudge, all in caps, was like yelling at you all the time. And he felt that it had become its own thing. It didn't need an acronym, so it just became Fudge. And it doesn't stand for anything, and you just spell it with a capital F and all lowercase after that. And that was Fudge. All right, enough of the history. What is it? What is Fudge? Fudge is a role-playing game. Pretty much it is a core mechanic with everything else built around there. The core mechanic is what we call the 7 adjective attribute ladder. And from worst to best, it goes terrible, poor, mediocre, fair, good, great, superb. Pretty easy to remember. I mean, when you first pick it up, you're going to go, leave out mediocre or something for a while, but you'll get it. But it's when you see things side by side, it's pretty great. It's intuitive. You know that good is better than fair. You know that great is better than good. It works. Anyway, so it's the adjective scale, which is pretty much applied to everything. Your character's strength, it's good. Your character's archery skill, fair, whatever. Everything like that. You use this attribute ladder, and then it has these dice, which are called Fudge dice, although a lot of people these days mistakenly call them Fate dice, because Fate, which was an offspring of Fudge, used the same dice, and they decided to call them Fate dice so they could sell them on their own, I guess. I don't know. Probably just to alleviate confusion, because I need to buy Fudge dice to play Fate. Yeah, that was probably it. But anyway, they're just in essence, three-sided dice with a plus, a blank, and a minus. And so when you go to do a task, I said archery before, right? Fair. So the GM just looks at the task and says, okay, you're trying to shoot 25 yards at a big target. That seems pretty easy to me. I'd say even a mediocre shot would make that. So you're fair, you take your dice. If you roll like 4 blanks or like 2 pluses and 2 minuses so they all cancel each other out, whatever, you had a fair shot. Fair is better than mediocre, you made it. If you roll the dice and it comes up to be like -1, so maybe like plus, minus, minus, blank. You know, the plus and the minus cancel each other out. The blank you don't care about. So it's -1. Fair -1 is mediocre. Hey, I said you needed a mediocre shot. You made it. Good job. That's it. That's really everything you have to say about Fudge right there. That's what it is. All right. So let's start the review. All right. So if this is your first time watching or listening to one of my reviews, the way I normally do reviews is I talk about 3 things I really like about the game, and I talk about 3 things I don't like as much about the game. And no matter the game, I can always come up with 3 things that, you know, just didn't hit me the right way, or 3 things I really liked a lot. And so that's how I am going to approach this. So let's start off with the things I liked. Number 1 on the things I liked is that it is free. Now, these days, that doesn't mean quite as much as it did back when I found the game, because there's all sorts of free games now. But back then, it was unusual to find a free game. And if you did, they were usually, you know, these little 5-10 page things written by some guy, you know, like me. But this was a 100-page document, professionally written by a professional game writer. And it was free, and it wasn't only free for you to get a copy, it was free for you to take and for to use this game set for whatever world you wanted and do with whatever you wanted, as long as you complied with the terms of the Fudge license, which were not that onerous at all. I left out earlier, by the way, that in 2005, when Grey Ghost took over, they also co-released it under the OGL, so you have your choice of licenses these days when you want to do something. So my first thing that I liked is that it's free. Number 2, the second thing I like is that this game is so easy for newbies to grok. I said during I lied. I said during RPG A Day August that I love running games for people. This is their first time ever playing a role-playing game. And just to say this attribute ladder, and you print it out and you put it in front of them. Like I said earlier, you know that superb is better than great. You know that mediocre is better than terrible. You can just look at these things and you get it. And you could say, okay, I get that with numbers too. But to say you need a mediocre shot, it's easier for a newbie to understand than saying you need a 12. Well, why is it 12? Why isn't it 13 or 11? Or you need mediocre. And then, well, why mediocre? Oh, because it's about that far, it's about that big, you know. So it's easy for players to grok, to understand, and yet it's complete. So that was my number 2. My number 3 of the things I liked is its versatility. You can use this game, like I said before, you can use it for science fiction, you can use it for fantasy, you can use it for modern day, like espionage or action adventure, you can use it for pulp. No matter what you want, you can use it. You can use it for low magic fantasy, for high magic fantasy, for space opera with psionics, space opera no psionics. No matter what you want to do, you can wrap Fudge around it. It is that easy. It is that simple. It is that awesome. Versatility is my number 3. Let's talk about the things I don't like as much. The first thing I don't like as much is the versatility. The very same thing I said I loved. That's because most of those rules aren't there. If you want psionic rules, you're going to have to write your own psionic rules. If you want magic rules, you're going to have to write your own magic rules. I mean, it is so versatile that things like attributes, you know, in your D20 systems, you have, you know, strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma. In Fudge, it says, pick what attribute you want. if you want to have set attributes or if you want to just let players define them, there is absolutely nothing there for you to go by. For skills, if you look at GURPS has 400 skills. Last time I counted, it's probably more now, which I think is a bit overkill. But that's what Fudge would call fine-grained skills. They also have, wide open generic skills. So instead of having geology and chemistry and physics and botany, you could just have a skill called science, and it covers all those things. And that's good for like a cinematic game or a Trek game. Spock was science. If it dealt with science, Spock knew the answer. So how does Fudge handle it? It says, figure it out. Do what you want to do. Everything like that. Combat. Oh, do you want like turn-by-turn combat? Here's a way to do that. Do you want to do everyone rolls at once combat? Here's a way to do that. And so when it comes time to play the game, you can't play the game. You cannot pick up Fudge and play it. As a GM, you're going to pick up Fudge, and the first thing you're going to do is spend a month at least writing your own game. A lot of people will say that Fudge is a toolkit. Stefan O'Sullivan disagrees. He says Stefan says Fudge is a game. I think the acronym actually gets it exactly correct. It is a gaming engine. Back when I was young, it was all the rage to like take your Opel GT and drop in a small block Chevy 350 in there to make it, fly like a rocket. You just put in the engine you wanted. And this is an engine that you kind of have to put together and drop into the game you want. So because it's all that work, because you cannot pick it up and run with it, it's my number one thing that I don't like. Number two, for things I don't like. So there's a section of the rules, and unlike other sections where it says you can do it this way, or you can do it that way, or you can do it this way, this section just stands on its own, and it's the scale rules. So scale means like if you have a human who has a fair strength, and you compare that to a giant who has a fair strength for giants, how do those two things really compare? And the rules there for a game called Fudge, for a game whose motto is just fudge it, are very specific and the math heaviest things in the game. There's almost no math anywhere else in the game, but right there, he gets very specific, and I don't get it. For me, it's easy. If you have a giant, they're on the giant scale, and I don't know, a fair strength giant, compared to other giants, is going to be a great strength compared to human, or a superb strength compared to human, or maybe even superb plus one, once you get into Titans, probably superb plus 2 or 3, If you're looking at a bunny compared to a human, a fair strength bunny for bunnies is going to be a terrible strength for a human, right? I don't know. I think it could have been handled so much easier, or at least give that option as a rule. By the way, the reason I took bunny is, like I said, Stefan O'Sullivan was the author of GURPS, Bunnies and Burrows, and he has said on numerous occasions that it is his favorite genre. And if he could write any book for Fudge, it would be Fudge, Bunnies, and Burrows, or something like that. But he was contractually prohibited from doing that. Part of the contract to get paid to write GURPS, Bunnies, and Burrows didn't let him do that for any other game. And I think that is where this focus on scale came from, because he needed to write everything in that book to bunny scale instead of human scale. And there's even a story he tells about having disagreements with the lying editor of GURPS about how to handle that. So I think it was just a particular passion of his, and he put it into the Fudge rules. So that is my number 2 thing I don't like about Fudge. All right, my number 3 thing that I do not like about Fudge, or that I like the least about Fudge, is its granularity, or rather the lack thereof. So when you look at, say, D&D, your strength can start at a 3 and go up to an 18. So there's a there's a spread of about 18 there. Oh, sorry, lies. There's a spread of about 16 there. In Fudge, your spread is 7, right? Because you can go from terrible to superb. There are 7 steps there. And that granularity sneaks into other ways. So when we start talking about skill levels, now let's talk about GURPS. In GURPS, you could have skill level of like -8, maybe not -8, of 8 maybe. Saying you had an average dex and you were taking the default skill. So yeah, 8. And that skill can go up to like 20, 25. You can get skills pretty high. And so that's a spread, again, of about 15 or so, I guess. And again, it's 7. And so that comes into play when we think of things in normal D&D terms. So like a +1 sword in D&D gives you like a 5% bonus. It's okay. A +1 sword in Fudge is a big deal. Because those steps, because there's only 7 steps, moving you up 1 step is a big jump. Versus in D&D, you're only moving 1 out of 20. So it's a big deal. For me, it doesn't matter. But for other people, it does. It can. So that is the number 3. All right, so that's my take on Fudge. We have 5 people that called in. Let's take a listen to what they had to say about Fudge.
Hey there, Joe from the Decahedron RPG podcast. It's Che from the Roleplay Rescue podcast, and I thought I would respond to your request about Fudge. What do I like about Fudge and what don't I like about Fudge? Well, I got into Fudge in around about 95, 96 when it came out as Fudge 1995 as a book. I think it's probably about 96, actually, maybe a little later. Certainly I had it digitally before I had it as a printed thing. And I loved the idea. First of all, so the things I love the Fudge dice, the invention of the Fudge dice, which is now known as the Fate dice and stolen horrendously from Stefan O'Sullivan's invention. And I just think it's a fantastic thing. Why? Because I also love the Fudge descriptor ladder. That ladder that goes from, terrible, poor, mediocre, fair, good, great, and superb. And these are obviously how you rate everything in your character sheet in a sort of baseline Fudge kind of a way. And what it allowed for is descriptive role-playing. So the tagline of Fudge is building blocks for better role-playing. And it certainly allowed a more descriptive form of role-play. So what I really loved about it is that I'm going to use my great strength to try and batter down that door. And, oh yeah, I've rolled a good success. Fantastic. I just love that language. I don't have to worry about numbers. It's fantastic. And the third thing is it's a toolkit. And I think that I wasn't ready for a toolkit until very, very recently, really. But I've always loved the kind of toolkit approaches of games like Fudge, coming as it does out of GURPS, which is actually my currently favourite toolkit. But the reason I kind of go to GURPS and not Fudge is because it's a toolkit. So the first thing I don't like about Fudge is it's a toolkit. You have to kind of construct your own game. It's essentially a series of ideas and guidance and everything else. I currently have the Fudge 10th Anniversary Edition book, which is what I use. It has loads and loads of extra stuff in it. I'm sitting here flipping pages now. I especially love the 5-point Fudge system, which is about character creation. But it is a toolkit and you have to put it together, and I always fall over. Every time I try and sit down to run a game of Fudge, I kind of found myself falling over myself, trying it hard to make decisions about how I wanted to run it and how I wanted to play it. I'm not a narrativist in my style of playing, and this does favour that, and that's the second strike. It's a narrativist game and has that focus, although it isn't that prescriptive. There is lots and lots of push in that direction, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. I'm not interested in story beats and kind of telling great stories that feel like great stories. I'm interested in emergent play, and that's a slightly different thing. If it's your thing, great. But my third strike, I think, is with combat. I always fell over with the combat rules, and it's because it doesn't have numbers. So that very thing that's the strength, the ladder, became the thing that kind of drove me away every time I sit down with combat. I want to roll damage dice, and even though there's a thing about using Fudge dice to do that, I kind of want to roll dice and get a number of damage points, hit points. It's something that really is sort of aesthetically something I really like in games. I think my ideal version would be Fudge with the GURPS damage system. Anyway, that's what I think of Fudge. I think it's a fantastic game. I think people should go and check it out. I think if you've only ever played Fate, by the way, and I don't like Fate, if you've ever played that, whether you like it or not, you should go and check out Fudge, because that's its ancestor. That's where it all comes from. And I just want to say big kudos to Stefan O'Sullivan, who's the author and creator of Fudge, for inventing Fudge dice and for inventing the Fudge ladder and basically changing the way I think about gaming. So I hope that helps. Game on, brother.
That was Shay from the Roleplay Rescue podcast. By the way, I think all my commenters are podcasters, and I'm going to leave links below to their podcasts. Hey, Shay, we agreed on an awful lot. I thought it was particularly funny how we both led with the biggest strength and the biggest weakness being the same thing. I called it versatility. You called it toolkitness. Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. We both are lovers of Fudge dice. In fact, I did a giveaway of Fudge dice once, and I called into Merc the Meek show once, and I said, hey, solution to the problem that you're looking for is Fudge dice. I think I disagree a little bit with your stance on narrative play, not on your stance so much as it's focused. I do agree that it's focused on narrative play, but I don't think it's focused on scripted narrative play. I think Fudge works perfectly with emergent narrative play, which is what I like. I always say I'm a narrative player or a narrative GM, but I don't mean that in terms of scripted storyline narrative. I mean that as in it's not simulation. I'm not looking at every possible thing and adding pluses and minuses. Oh, it's dark. The floor is slippery. It's, I'm not doing that simulationist stuff. I'm not doing that gamist stuff. Oh, we're trying to win. We're trying to lose. I am looking at the story that is emerging, the narration that is emerging, and I consider that narrative play. And I never felt that Fudge was trying to lean me into scripted play at all. But hey, maybe you did. I mean, people are different. You said the thing about damage by numbers, and Fudge had the damage track, right, with 1 through 10, and if you go up to 10, then you're out, and 1 through 3 are a scratch, and all that stuff, and the mid, min, max die roll for all that. That's very numeric. Yeah, and there's no reason why you couldn't just tack GURPS damage onto Fudge anyway. It would work, just PG keying. But yeah, the damage track sounds like it would be what you're looking for. No? As for Fate, we agree. It sounds like I think I'm a little more forgiving of Fate. Fate Accelerated versus the other. I like some of what Fate did. I dislike. I like the aspects in Fate. I think they're great storytelling elements for the characters to tell for the players to tell their character's story. And again, it's emerging. It's not scripted. On the other hand, what they did to the Fudge ladder, I think, is an abomination. I guess I would call the Fate ladder terrible -2. Yeah, so between Fate and Fudge, I like Fudge better. Hey, thanks for the call, Shay. Let's see who's next.
Hey, Joe, this is Merc. I don't have a actual review of Fudge. I didn't get the rules. I didn't take the time for that. But I do remember way back towards the beginning of my podcast, you called in to recommend the Fudge dice for like an oracle, or maybe that's just me interpreting what you said towards an oracle for solo gameplay and everything. And that's what I did afterwards. So those pluses and minuses are really nice to get a general sense of, does something happen? Is it a positive thing that happens? Is it a negative thing, or is it kind of neutral? I combine that with like a D6, usually to say like a yes or no, and then which direction it might go. So those fudge dice can certainly add a lot of flavor. I really like them. I don't have a full-on review, but I figured I'd throw this out there at least. Hope it helps. Take care.
Hey, Merc, thanks for that. Was just talking about you and fudge dice. I'm glad they worked for you. If I were going to use fudge dice as an oracle, I think I would use the full ladder and look at the current situation and say the current situation from the player's point of view, or the likelihood of whatever I'm asking, is good. Roll the dice, the fudge dice. Maybe I would only do 3 dice instead of 4, but maybe all 4. And then just go on the ladder and see where it turns out. And so if it comes out fair, you can use that to inform the narration of the solo play or of the oracle. So if the current outlook was like good, but you rolled -4, good -4 brings you down to terrible, something terrible is going to happen, right? I think that would work really keen for a solo narrative play. But I'm glad that you've been liking them. I'm glad that you have a system that works for you. Let's listen to the next call.
Hey Joe, Riley here. Just calling in my review-ish thing of Fudge. I'm looking at the 95 edition, and I'm sorry I'm not going to follow your format with this one. Mainly, I did try. I found it really, really difficult to come up with a list of positives and negatives for a game like this, which is essentially a toolbox. As I went through, I was like, I'm not sure if I really like that. Maybe I put that on the con list. And then you get to a sentence that says, if you don't like this, don't use it. Meta currency. It's like, you can not give it at all, or give 1, or give 10, have a max. There's really nothing concrete to say about the mechanics of the game and whatnot. So I found that very difficult. The other thing is, for me, toolbox games and skill-based games are not my cup of tea. And so off the bat, it's not really my type of game. I do appreciate it, though, and I do appreciate toolbox games in a different way. I like to use them to supplement the game that I'm actually playing. So for an example, I might really like the way that Fudge describes your capabilities in a certain attribute or skill or whatever, rather than using numerics, like a number. It gives you a description, and I can pull that across, right? So I can give your 3d6 middle range the mediocre score, or I guess the fair score, and as you go up, I give you the higher descriptive terms, right? So I could use that, and so I think for me that's how I would use this game. But anyway, let's put a wrap on it. I'll try and give 1 positive, 1 negative. Starting with the negative thing I didn't like about it is that it's really there's nothing concrete about the game. Like what is Fudge as a game is really hard to define and nail down, because it's a toolbox, right? It's not. I don't think it's really a fault in the design of Fudge. But the positive is that, well, it's a toolbox. There are a ton of options and great ideas that you can use and that I can use in other games. So anyway, thank you very much for putting this together. I really look forward to hearing what everyone else thought and for this to continue. Anyway, bye for now.
Hey, Riley, you joined Shay and me in both saying that the plus and the minus of the game is its versatility, is its toolboxness, is its lack of definition for anything. So 100% agreement there. Disagreement in that I like toolbox type games, but that's just like saying, I like lemon pie and some people like lemon meringue. Oh, yuck, I hate meringue, right? It means nothing. It's personal preference. Yeah. So you did manage to find a plus and a minus, see? And it was the same thing. And I did the same thing, and Shay did the same thing. So, yeah. And I think that tells the listener, the viewer, something about the game. But to put a plus spin on it, if you ever toyed with the idea of making your own game, picking up a copy of Fudge and trying to make your house rules for Fudge is a great first step to get you in that mindset. I've talked before about how Decahedron, the name for this podcast, was originally the name for a game I was writing. And that game was really my home Fudge build with all the numbers stripped away because the players I was playing with at the time didn't like the adjectives. They preferred numbers, and they didn't like the Fudge dice. So pretty much Decahedron, the game, was going to be Fudge, but all in numbers. And one thing I will say in their defense is when dealing with numbers, what's good minus 3, right? It's meaningless. I mean, so you need that piece of paper in front of you to have the ladder and then step down 3 steps. By the way, it would be poor. But, you know, so I'll give them that. But hey, Riley, thanks for the call. You rocked. And Riley, by the way, is the host of Diegetic Advancement Podcast. And I didn't say it for Merc the Meek, but Merc the Meek is the host of the Merc the Meek podcast. And like I said, everyone will have links in the show notes or down below. Thanks again, Riley. Let's listen to who's next.
Hey Joe, this is Jason. Thank you for talking about Fudge this month. So my background with Fudge is that I've been aware of it since the early years of the century. I have numerous editions of it, numerous adaptations of it, including the Princess Bride RPG, which is maybe the most recent high-profile version of it. But I've never played it. So this is just my impressions of the system. I don't have any practical experience playing the system. I also want to caveat this by saying that it's kind of a stretch of your normal way of reviewing RPGs because this is a toolkit. And it's not fair to take a toolkit and critique individual. I guess it is fair, but I have a problem with taking the toolkit and saying, I don't like this version of wounds that they offer because they offer numerous versions of wounds, right? And in fact, here's the thing with the toolkit approach. I'm actually going to read a quick section here, and this is about wounds, but this is pretty standard throughout the entire document. This section introduces some of the simpler options for determining wounds. Many others are possible in Fudge, and this list should not be considered official or exhaustive. They are included for possible use, but also to inspire the GM to create her own. So every step of creating a game, from attributes and traits and gifts, superpowers, to action resolution mechanics, to wounds and healing, to character advancement, everything you can think of, they give you multiple ways to do it, and then advice on creating your own ways to do it. So I don't know that it makes sense to sit there and say, well, my number one dislike is option 3 for combat, because they give you other options, right? It's not one size fits all kind of game. It's a toolkit. And I guess so with that out of the way, I'm going to discuss the 1995 version because that's the free version online, and that's the version you said you're going to cover. If somebody was going to go out and get Fudge today, I think it's worth grabbing that free version, looking at that. I own earlier versions, the original version, I think. I've got original print version. I've got is it the enhance or the, I've got the one that came out before the 10th anniversary. I think it's the enhanced edition, the 10th anniversary edition. The 10th anniversary gives you a ton of additional options and examples in there. So the 10th anniversary, if you read this and love this, it's well worth your time buying that. But let's get into, with those caveats out of the way, let's get into talking about our friend Stephen O'Sullivan's Fudge. Fudge this is a toolkit, and we have to approach it that way. When I look at my notes for pros, my first pro is that this is accessible. And I mean that a couple different ways. It's accessible as in it's free, so you can easily find a copy of it for free online, the PDF. You can buy print copies easily. So if you want to pay for a copy of it, you can easily get the upgraded version. The 10th anniversary version is available through PDF Drive Through RPG. You can go to Grey Ghost Games, who control the license for Fudge now, and you can buy copies of the 10th anniversary book. So, it's accessible. It's easy to find, either free or in paid print versions of it. It's also accessible from the point of view of people with disabilities or people with challenges. And that's because Fudge, by its nature, is written, one of the design goals of Fudge, if you go to O'Sullivan's website, Panix, PANIX.com, he has designer notes for Fudge in there, right? And he talks about what his design goals were. His design goals were not having to look things up. And this comes after writing and playing GURPS. So Fudge kind of is a descendant of GURPS in some ways. But the design goals are not having to look things up, not having to make calculations while using the dice, the ability to return realistic results so not to break the willing suspension of disbelief, a character sheet you can understand without having to translate everything into English, and minimizing the out-of-character actions and statements, meaning you stay in character focus the entire time. You're not jumping from I'm in the mindset of my character to I'm in the mindset of the player using metacurrency. Although there is an option of using metacurrency in the game, the idea is to mainly stay in your character's shoes throughout the game. And one of the ways they do this, of course, is with what they call the ladder. And with the Fudge ladder, instead of having attributes that have numbers, they have words. And he's done 7 words because 7 is what we find to be like this magical number that is very easy to remember. 7 options. People can tend to remember lists of up to 6 or 7 things, but 7 is about the maximum list size that the average person can remember at any one time. So, he's put a lot of thought in designing this, but by using regular words for your ladder, for what your attributes are, mediocre, fair, good, great, these are easy to remember for the average person, and you can easily know that great is better than good, is better than fair. So it's easy, it's accessible from that point. You don't even need to look at a chart. You just know by hearing it that superb is going to be better than great. So you don't even have to look that up. The other way it's really accessible are the Fudge dice, and we'll talk more about the dice later. But if you're using the Fudge dice, and I think it's, even though there are options in the game to not use the Fudge proprietary dice, I think it's fair to include the Fudge dice in the critique of the game. The Fudge dice are very accessible because if you're playing in person and you're sight impaired, by touch, you can tell if it's a minus, if it's a plus, or if it's a blank side. So the Fudge dice themselves are accessible almost like Braille. They're not Braille, but kind of like Braille dice, where they're very easy to tell. Even myself, who's a sighted person, I can close my eyes, touch a Fudge dice, and instantly tell whether it's blank, whether it's a minus or a plus. So, so it's very accessible from the point of view of that. It's accessible from the point of view of that math is minimized in this game. Now, there are times in this game, and you'll see the examples of characters where they have, you're adding multiple things to come up with an offensive damage factor or defensive damage factor. But you do all that math ahead of time. It's front loaded. So you're not doing that math at the table. Typically, your character will have those numbers written down before the game starts. So all you'll need to know is, you have a +2 here, or a +3 there, a -2 here. Very, very simple. So if you're not great at math, this game is designed for you. It really is. If you don't want to try to think about math during the game, for the most part, scale is a little bit different. But for the most part, this game pretty much eliminates most math from the game, which helps it be very accessible. It's also a narrative game, although you can make this game very crunchy and remove the narrative parts of it. The author definitely prefers the more narrative version of the game, and there's a narrative bias from the author you can see when you're reading the options. And I think that narrative version of the game leaning into the narrative makes it more accessible to somebody than trying to memorize rules and charts and all that kind of thing. So my first plus is it's a very accessible game from a variety of ways. My second plus is that it's a very adaptable system. And I've talked about this a little bit already, in that there are multiple options for every nuance and every little thing in the game. Even the dice, like I say, I think it's fair to talk about the Fudge dice as part of the game because these proprietary dice, because, that's a big part of the system. But even with those Fudge dice, he gives you options in here to not use the Fudge dice. There's a diceless version of this game, a diceless option in here, and then there are charts in here to help you and teach you how to easily use other dice instead of the Fudge dice, how to use D6, or how to use, you could do D6 minus D6, roll a white and a black D6 and subtract one from, one being, and subtract one from the other and, use that number as your result, right? You could use D100, you can do D percentile. There's a conversion chart for that. There's a conversion chart for 3D6, so you could roll 3D6 instead. Looking online, of course, which is outside the scope of this particular book, but the curve, the bell curve, and he wanted a bell curve, and the Fudge dice give you a bell curve, but you can match that bell curve by rolling a D4 minus a D4, and if the result is a 3, you roll another D4. If it's a 4, then that counts as a plus or minus 4. So it's very adaptable, even to the point where you don't need these proprietary dice that comes with. You can do any kind of game with this. You can make this as narrative and light as you want, or as heavy as you want. Do you want to have attributes and skills? You can do that. Do you just want a game with only skills? You can do that. It's super variable, and so you can really customize this to make any kind of game. In fact, when you look at some of the fan versions that are free up there that you can download, there's somebody took this to do Marvel superheroes, TSR Marvel superheroes. It's called Marvelous Superheroes, but they pretty much recreated that game using, the Fudge base as that. So it's a super adaptable game. If you are a GM and you want to create your own game system that really matches what you want, then this is a great way to go. The third pro I'm going to throw out is support. And this is not specific to this book, but in the game system in general. So when O'Sullivan wrote this, he wanted it to be free to everybody as long as he was alive. And it's written under the OGL. So the base version of this game that's out there, the 95, the PDF out there, is OGL. And that's not going to go away. It's not going to be revoked as much as Wizards of the Coast may want it to be. And so you're always going to be able to use a version of this game to base your game on. And when he sold the rights to Grey Ghost Games to Anne Dupuy, Joe will pronounce her name correctly, she agreed to keep that free version out there easily accessible. And of course, it's on the internet. You can't stop the signal, so it's always going to be out there. But she's kept it in print and through Grey Ghost Games. And Grey Ghost Games not only has a number of free things out there, they have a number of published things out there that you can buy for it. So support's out there. There are still, forums out there. There are Reddits out there. There are Discords out there that are current that are supporting this game. There are still publishers out there publishing under this rule set, new games for it and new options for it. So support is out there. It's not maybe as popular as it used to be, but it's definitely, there's a lot of support out there if you know where to look. You might have to do a little bit of research to find, but the community is welcoming and very happy to answer questions. And there's decades of recommendations and discussion on the internet that you can find with a little bit of work. So let's go to the cons. This is neither a pro nor a con. The free PDF we're talking about, the 95 version, is perfectly usable. I think it's totally acceptable as a free version of a game, a toolkit game. It has a little bit of art in here. It's all public domain art or clip art, and it works fine. There's nothing wrong with the art. To Joe's point, I would agree with him that you could remove all the art from this document and the document be perfectly fine. I don't think you needed any art in this toolkit, but if you're going to do it, I think what they did is fine. It's set up in a 2-column layout. It's easy to read. I personally could not just read the 107 pages in one go because it's a toolkit. It's, okay, we're going to talk about attributes. Here are the 3 ways you can do attributes. Here's this way you can do this. Here's the 4 ways you can do wounds. And that's kind of dry. There is some humor built into this game, into the writing of the game. So, it's not super duper dry, but, it'll take you a little bit to work through it. But I think the presentation of the document is fine. I don't think it's the best ever, and I don't think it's the worst ever. So now to actual cons. The first one, I mean, all these are from a certain point of view, right? But the first one I would say is if you just have this document, it's going to require a lot of work on the GM's part to get it to the point where you can actually sit down and play. You can't pick up the 1995 PDF and sit down with your players half an hour later and play the game, right? All it is a toolkit. You need to go through this and decide what options or use it, let it inspire you to write your own thing. So it's going to require work on your part as a GM. You can't pick this up and immediately roll into a game. Now, they do give you a number of examples in this. At the back, they give you examples on all kinds of different characters, how to do equipment, how to do creatures. They give you a number of examples in there, how to do magic systems, psionic systems. So they do give you a lot of examples in this document, but they're just that. They don't give you a setting, and they don't give you, this is how to play this particular thing. Now, they don't have to, because we go back to that support I talked about. There are free games already built. And there are published games that cost a little bit of money already built. So if you want to play Fudge and you don't want to build it yourself, you can grab a version that's already built by somebody else and play. But if you just grab this particular document, it's going to require work and decisions on the GM's part. The second con is we're going to go back to those proprietary dice. So the Fudge dice, I've got them. I like different dice. But the Fudge dice do require you to go out and buy proprietary dice. And the other thing with the Fudge dice are, I don't know that they're the most elegant. I think when O'Sullivan was designing this, he fell in love with the curve and he fell in love with the idea of Fudge dice, and he got them made. But I don't know that they're the best answer to the problem, honestly. And he even almost admits this a little bit, right? So when we go to his website and he talks about a very simple dice option, he says that, Ray Otis had talked about the idea of you can buy the Pop-O-Matic, from like the Trouble board game. You can buy the Pop-O-Matic shells and put a D6 in them these days. And he says now that you can do that, buy a keychain Pop-O-Matic with D6. On his website, he talks about how he considered this in 92, but rejected it for being too simplistic. It's back now because I realize Fudge can survive the simplistic techniques. And he gives a version that just uses a single D6. That pretty much, is really close to the standard bell curve. It's not a bell curve because it's D6, but it's close to the same percentages. But I think you can get pretty close to the same result using 1d6 minus another d6. And I think that's probably faster at the table and probably a better way to go if you're going to play Fudge in most cases. Now, we do have the accessible argument I made in the pros, and if you're playing with sight-impaired folks or something like that, or really math-impaired folks, people have a hard time math, the Fudge dice don't really require you to do math. You just take away ones that are like each other, and you can touch them and feel what they are. So there is an argument for the Fudge dice, but I think maybe not the requirement for proprietary dice, but the assumption you're going to use proprietary dice, and the fact that proprietary dice might be a little too clever for their own good, probably puts that in the con category, just as a minor con. And then the last thing I'm going to say, and this is me stretching for a third con, is that it's really been eclipsed by Fate. So Fate is a child of Fudge, but it changes it and adds in the aspects and definitely delves more into the narrative kind of game, even though you can build this very narratively. And Fate has really eclipsed Fudge, and Fudge has really fallen in the background now. So it's not as well known a system, and because of that, you might have a harder time getting player buy-in to play the game. So that would be the last con I would give. But as far as this document goes, I like it. It's not my favorite version of the Fudge rules. The 95 aren't the ones I would reach and grab if I was going to run Fudge, but I think it's a great way. It's free. It's a great way to get into it. I would give somebody maybe somebody new to the system, maybe 5-point Fudge or one of the lighter versions for their initial read to sell them on the game. But I think this is a perfectly usable document. I think it's an important game in the history of the hobby, even though it's kind of forgotten by a lot of people or unknown by a lot of people. And I look forward personally to this year, 2025, building my own game from Fudge, my own Fudge-based game. And I'll do that over on my blog. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Joe, thank you so much for this. I look forward to the next game we talk about. I hope this wasn't too long, and I will talk to you again soon.
Hey, Jason, thanks for that review. Yeah, all sorts of thoughts run through my mind there. The first thing, Expanded Edition, was the edition you were struggling to remember the name of. It's the Fudge Expanded Edition that came out after 95 and before the 10-year anniversary. Metacurrency, how could I forget metacurrency? Fudge is the first game I encountered that used metacurrency. It's not the first game ever to use it. I think that was Buffy, although I think Buffy came later. I don't know. They call them Fudge points. They're kind of everywhere now, so I probably don't need to explain them, but you can spend Fudge points in order to, re-roll a die, re-roll a roll if you get a bad roll you didn't like, to produce something in the game world, stuff like that. This is, and I know you're not a huge fan of metacurrency. I am. Again, people are different. They like different things. Some people put meringue on lemon pie. I don't get it. But yeah, I love metacurrency, and this was the first game I encountered that had it. The options you talked about for using no fudge dice, like you talked about the 2d6s, positive and negative. By the way, an easier way to do that is not to math and subtract the negative from the positive. Is just to look at them and take the lower one. So if your positive one is a 6 and your negative one is a 1, the result's a negative 1. If they're equal, the result is 0. The other caveat of that is if the result comes up to be positive or negative 5, you treat that as a 0. That was the original rule before there were fudge dice. So if you could find the old slug game, or if you could find the 92 drafts, everything leading up to 95, before there were fudge dice, you would see that was actually the default rule. That was the way to do it. You mentioned a fan had a Marvel Superheroes build, which is interesting because I always heard that the original TSR Marvel Superheroes was the inspiration to use adjectives as attribute values. So that it went back the other way now is interesting. You talked about community, and you talked about it in a positive light, which is funny because I don't think the community is what it used to be. The community used to be awesome. It used to be great. In fact, the reason I had to leave the Fudge mailing list was, if anything, it was too active, and there was so much email coming in every day that I started to skip them. And I'm like, why am I even in it? And so I dropped out. And so leading up to this review, I try to reconnect with community. And the one or two I found are kind of dead and dying. It's kind of what you say towards the end, where you say that Fudge has been eclipsed by fate. And it's kind of the forgotten stepchild. And I think the community speaks to that as well. That's been my experience. You talk about fudge dice as proprietary dice, and it's funny because I've never thought about that in that way, and you're exactly right. Yeah, and I'm usually very against proprietary dice. What's the new? It's the new Star Wars that has the proprietary dice, or it's the new Star Trek, whatever. Yeah, I refuse to play the game for that reason. That's why I'm picking Star Wars. Yeah, I don't like proprietary dice. I guess because it's been a million years since Fudge came out, and then Fate was like the hot thing for a while, that they're kind of common now, and it's almost a standard die. But like when we talk about DCC and we talk about like a D16, whether you consider that a proprietary die, I don't know. I think you can make an argument either way. What you didn't get at, or you didn't mention historically, the reason we got Fudge dice is because Stefan was talking to, I think it was Caplo of Caplo Dice, but it might have been Chessex. It was one of the two. And it was talking about like what he wanted to do for dice. And they were saying that, how expensive that would be. But then they said, it's to take two faces off. We already have a plus minus die, with 3 pluses and 3 minuses. To take 2 of those faces off and make them blank, that is cheap. And so that's how we got Fudge dice. It wasn't what Stefan wanted. It wasn't what he had planned. It's what was affordable. And for the longest time, you could only get them through Grey Ghost Games, and that made them very proprietary. And now, like I said, with Fate, they're everywhere. But the other argument that you didn't bring up against Fudge dice is online, like Roll20, virtual tabletops. Situation's probably a little better these days because of Fate. But if you want to do something different with them, if you don't want to roll 4, you still might run into snags. Now, equivalently, they are the equivalent. Rolling 4d6, rolling 4df Fudge dice is the same as rolling 4d3 minus 8. But if you're not a math nerd to come up with that off the top of your head, you're kind of, it's a pain in the butt. So, yeah. So good point about Fudge dice being proprietary. I had never thought about that. You talked about artwork, and the game would be fine without the artwork. I would argue that it would be even better without the artwork because it doesn't really belong there. It was, like I said, the original version of Fudge was text files. Actually, the way I found it is that there was a mail server. Do you remember those? Where you would send, it was the free RPG mail server. So you would send an email and you say list, and then it would send you an email back and it would have a huge list of free RPGs. And you look over them and you would send the email back with the title of the one you wanted, and you would get email back with the one you wanted as an attachment. And Fudge was just text files. They were all, .txt, ASCII files, so anything could open them up. And I went looking for them for this review, and I cannot find them anywhere. Grey Ghost only has the PDFs. I don't know if that's intentional. Conspiracy theory. I don't know if that's intentional to make it harder for people to do Fudge builds, or if more likely just enough people weren't downloading them. Everybody wanted the PDFs, so they were like, why bother? But yeah, I would really like to find the Fudge files. I need to go through my old hard drives and see if I still have them, the old text files. I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about. I can't think of anything else, so I must have. Thanks to you very much for that call, Jason. By the way, everyone, Jason is the host of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Again, links below. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to say. You said that you're going to make a Fudge build on your blog. That's definitely something I want to follow. And hopefully, whoever you were hosted with before, for some reason, my ISP had them blocked, and I could never bring up your blog except on my phone. And unlike all the kids these days, I have old eyes, and looking at that little screen for that long, I'm not a fan. So I prefer the big screen on my laptop. But yeah, I'm very excited about that. And with your new hosting provider and everything, I'm hoping that I will be able to read those. Yeah, very excited. All right, we have one more call. This one I think was from Barry. So let's get, Barry is the host of GM Shadow, was his podcast, but I heard it had a name change, but it's also in hiatus. I'm not quite sure, but there will be a current link for whatever the truth is in the show notes. Let's give a listen to Barry.
Hi Joe, it's Barry here from A Song of Dice and Shadows, just ringing in to basically talk about a quick review for Fudge RPG. We're saying history-wise, I actually ran Fudge about 15 years ago, although that was the 10th anniversary edition, and we're talking about the 1995 edition, but I'll try and keep it to things that are in the 95 edition as much as I can. Main things to say, just to kind of narrow it down and keep this brief, because I'm going to record an episode with Jason from Nerds RPG Variety Cast around the subject, so kind of not to overlap too much, hopefully. Main things to say really are that, so I've taken some good points from it. Things I like about Fudge is I like the idea that all your stats and abilities are sort of rated in a name basis, so basically it describes your characters, so it's not just a number, it kind of describes what you're good at, what you're bad at, you're terrible at this, poor at this, mediocre at that, good, great, superb, etc. I kind of really like that from looking at a character sheet and getting this almost like narrative description of a character. Other things I like about Fudge, I like the fact it's a classless level system essentially, so I kind of tend to sort of gravitate more towards those systems. I don't like systems where you kind of pigeonhole in this kind of arbitrary way. I get why we do it in some games, it does kind of help that niche protection, does help kind of, I guess, get you those idea about what your abilities are and kind of help define it in that way, but actually I prefer the idea of flexibility of building a character I want to build and not being kind of forced into some sort of pigeonhole really around it. Another thing is it's quite a skill-based system, so I do kind of like that AMA system, so I guess in a way that's the three things I like about it. If I was to pick things I wasn't so keen on, and the flip side of talking about the how the skills and things are described, one of the things I found when I'm running it is that although there are these name level kind of base things, 9 times out of 10 people end up kind of still looking at it from a numerical value. There's a lot of numbers in the system still, including when you're looking at things like damage and stuff, and that seems to take over a bit. And I seem to recall from when we played it, people were often saying, oh, it was like a +2 or whatever, and they tended to kind of move back towards the number system anyway rather than the word system, so take that as you will. Another thing I'd say about it is that because Fudge is a bit of a toolkit, I actually struggled when I first tried it out because there was kind of a lot in there, and I think I found it hard. Reading it again recently now, I think I probably handle it a bit better. I think I've got more experience on the systems, so it doesn't faze me as much, but at the time that was the thing I found a bit more complicated, that it's almost like because there are so many options of how you can do things, it can be a little bit overwhelming when you're reading the book to kind of think about how you build a system using Fudge, because it's a toolkit thing. My last one is one I always say for these systems, I think it's fair to mention it, is the fact you need specialist dice to play it. I know there are rules in Fudge for using D6, using percentiles and stuff, but they do make the system quite awkward. It really is kind of built around the Fudge dice, which are plus minus blank kind of faced D3s essentially, and you roll 4 of them. But again, it's a case that if you haven't got them, you'd have to go out and buy them. It's not as bad as some other systems, like I'm not a fan of the Fantasy Flight sort of narrative dice system. I know some people do like them, but again, to me, it's just these obscure kind of symbols, me having to remember what they all mean, whereas numbers or something simple, I guess, with Fudge, because it's like a plus or a minus, it's not as bad. But I still kind of think, to be fair, it is something I do find a little bit irritating, that, could you not build a system just around normal dice, essentially? And like I said, with the way that system works, it wouldn't work quite the same way. If you try to stick away from numbers and move much towards those descriptive terms, it doesn't kind of fit in there. But I think it's only fair, if I'd criticize other systems for it, I do need to raise it, I guess, a little bit around it. Like, for example, I'd like to play a bit of Fudge just now again to practice, but my Fudge dice are actually buried in a box since I moved house 2 years ago that I've not dug out, where I can't just grab a D6 and it would roll and I'd have to work it out, and I can't be bothered, essentially. So I'll have to use an app or get some more, or dig out that box from somewhere. And it's just a kind of example of that, where that's my only issue with those fancy specialist dice, I guess. So anyway, that's kind of a thing. I would say overall, though, I did quite like Fudge. I've got some nice things to say about it, and like I said, I'm going to be doing a recording with Jason soon, and we're going to be talking a bit around it, and I'm going to talk around some of that stuff. But yeah, that's it as a kind of brief review anyway, so if that's any use to you, let me know. Okay, take care, bye.
Hey, Barry. Thanks for that. By the way, everyone, I guess you heard Barry's podcast is called Of Dice and Shadows. There will be a link below. Sounds like we agree on a lot of things. Classless, yes, thanks for bringing that up. Fudge is a classless system. It's skill-driven, attribute and skill-driven. I drive it skill-driven. I don't use attributes when I play Fudge, but it very well could be, because one of the options in Fudge is broad skill groups. So why can't Thief be your broad skill group? Thief, Cleric, Fighter, Magic User. Those are your 4 skills, have your 6 attributes, rate them all, and you could do that if you wanted. It might be an interesting game. Not my thing, but it might be somebody's. The other thing you said was Fantasy Flight games. That's what I was trying to think of when I was just talking about Jason's call. You said no no fudge dice. There's the 6-sided die option that I just talked about when I was referring to Jason's call. Yeah, thanks for the call, Barry. Everybody else, thank you very much for watching and or listening. Like I said, next month's review will be Tunnels and Trolls. I know it's not free, but there is a free edition up there, but it's very scaled down. It was made for free RPG a day years ago. So you could grab that one for free if you wanted to. But the first edition is up on drive-thru. It's only $3. The fourth edition is up on drive-thru. It's only $4. The fifth edition, which is kind of the de facto edition, is up there for only $7. So it's not much. And this game is like a cornerstone of the hobby. It was like I said, it's the oldest RPG that's currently still in print. Well, I mean, you could say Dungeons & Dragons is, but Dungeons & Dragons has changed so much that what we have today for Dungeons & Dragons is not the same as 1974 Dungeons & Dragons. Whereas if you look at the newest incarnation of Tunnels and Trolls, currently, as I record this, and look at the first edition, you can say, yeah, these are the same games. I mean, some things have changed, but at its core, it is the same game. So for that reason, I said, yeah, I'm going to leave the free realm for this one exception. So if you want to review Tunnels and Trolls, get it to me by April 1st. Nope, sorry, lies. Get it to me by March 1st. And we will do the Tunnels and Trolls episode first thing in March. Thanks again for watching and or listening. And until next time, happy gaming, happy life. Bye.